Actually going to not talk about how to burn your house down, take all the wallpaper off or such. We're going to go back in time and we're going to talk about maple syrup, when it started, where it started, and how sustainable harvesting of maple syrup has evolved over the ages. Now the first thing everybody always wants to ask, okay, so we're going back to then time. So the first question anybody always asks is, who discovered maple syrup? When was it discovered? So, doing what any good researcher will do, I Googled it. Came to the conclusion maple syrup was discovered before Google. In fact, it was discovered before the internet. Before Al Gore. So, if you don't have an internet, what do? You go to the library. Well, guess what? Maple syrup was around before libraries too. However, there are all kinds of folklores not written down that talk about the origins of maple syrup. And I grew up in the Ottawa Valley amongst the Algonquins, and one of their fables, if you like, is one of my favorites. And it talks about the maple tree. And the maple tree had an infection. It had an infection of little bugs, beetles crawling underneath its bark. And it was itchy. And while it had lots and lots of limbs, it had no way to scratch those itches. So it reached out to its friends, the beaver, and the porcupine, and the squirrel, and it said, "Help, I'm itchy, I need somebody to come and help me." And the beaver, and the porcupine, and the squirrel said, well, they didn't quite say, "Too bad for you." They said, "We're busy. We feel for you, but we can't help." So the maple tree said to the birds, "You land in my branches all year round. I provide you homes, I provide you nests. Please help me with this itching problem." And the birds said, "We don't know how to help. We're sorry." So then the maple tree was a little sad because he was itchy and nobody would help. But along came the woodpecker, and the woodpecker said, "I can help." And he brought along his friend, the flicker, and he brought along another friend, the downy woodpecker. And amongst the three of them, they got onto the maple tree's trunk, and they pulled all the nasty bugs and grubs from underneath the bark, and the maple tree felt much, much better. So as a reward for that, the maple tree said, "Mr. Woodpecker and your friends, I will make it's such that if you make a small hole in my bark, there will be a delicious liquid that comes forth. And that delicious liquid will allow you to sustain yourself early in the spring when there are no bugs, or those bugs that are left are frozen solid and not much fun to eat." So the woodpecker did that. And then the Algonquin tribe learned from the woodpecker that the maple tree would be able to do that. And there's photographic evidence that this is true. There you go. Unfortunately, just like everywhere else, once somebody helps somebody out and gets rewarded for it, all those earlier guys that said, not me, not me, they want to be part of the game too. So there's the other birds, the little chickadees, and the squirrels. They're out there as well. Now that's just one of many, many legends around the maple tree. There are numerous other ones. Probably the most common one, and I've seen it in Mohawk, I've seen it in Algonquin, I've seen it down in others, is the story about the chief who came home from a long and frustrating hunting trip. Funny how every hunting trip is always long and frustrating. And he came home and he was very despondent. He threw his tomahawk in anger at a local maple tree. It stuck into the side of the tree. And his lovely wife decided that she was going to try and make him feel better. So she told him she would make his favorite bear stew. But when she went to get her birch bark basket to go down to the lake to get the water to make it, it was on the ground underneath the tree, and it was filled with clear liquid that had been running from the tomahawk down the handle and dripping into it. So she poured that clear liquid, thinking it was water, into the stew, and this delicious aroma came out, and the chief was forever grateful And there's another way how maple syrup was discovered. I could go on and on and on. There are a lot of legends, but I think probably the one I do want to share with you is the legend of Glooscap. Glooscap is one of, and I will butcher the name, I apologize if anybody knows how to pronounce it better than me, but he is one of the great spirits. And so the legend of Glooscap goes something like this. There was a tribe that was having a very, very hard winter. It was cold, there was no food, they were at death's door. So the Great Spirit said, that's okay, you've been a good tribe, I will make you a solution for the winter. And so he made it so that the maple trees would provide syrup. And so the tribe was saved, they all got syrup from it. Now Glooscap, who was a bit of a troublemaker, mischief maker, came back later in the summer to check on this tribe. And lo and behold, there was nobody in camp. There was no crops in the fields. All the bows were leaning up against the teepees. I mean, what is going on here? So off he went looking for the members of the tribe. And there he found them. Every man, woman, child, even the dogs, lying on their backs in the maple grove, having syrup drip into their tongues. Now Glooscap said that's not the way it was supposed to be. And so being a little bit of a troublemaker, Glooscap took a birch bark basket, and for 40 days and 40 nights he made trips down to the lake, and he filled the birch bark basket with water, and he poured it into the top of the maple trees. And then he came back to the tribe and said, you guys cannot lie around and do nothing. The maple syrup that you are used to will still be available to you, but you will have to work for it. You will have to take this sap, this runny syrup, and you will need to boil it down 40 to 1. I had to make 40 trips. You're going to have to boil it 40 to 1. It will still be available for you, but it will only be available at the end of wintertime. In that period where there isn't good hunting, your crops are all gone. It will still be there, but now you will need to work for it. And the Glooscap legend is in many, many tribes as well. Okay, so earliest techniques. And you know, we say then and now. You're going to find out all night that then is now, because things don't really change that much. Maple syrup making is pretty simple. You put a wound in the tree, you collect the sap, you boil it down, you got syrup. Simple as that. Now, in those days, they didn't have drills, they didn't have axes. So they used tomahawks. They would cut a gash in the tree. They would use a little birch bark basket. If you didn't have birch bark in your area, you'd use an elm bark basket. If you didn't have birch or elm in your basket, you would use skin, and you would create a little bit. And then you would put those underneath the trees. You put a little stick at the bottom of the gash to get it, the drip away from the tree, and you would collect it. You can't boil in those. So gathering became the next part of it. And guess what? Today, gathering is part 2. Part 1, you drill holes and get it somewhere. Part 2, you have to haul it. Wooden logs were hauled out. In some cases, somebody got smart and decided, I'm not carrying this out. So they put the wooden logs right underneath the tree so that it could drip straight into it. Some of the records I've been reading about had bark vessels up to 100 gallons. I don't know how big a tree it would take to make a 100-gallon bark vessel. Moose hide makes a vessel as well. Obviously, as you're collecting the sap is bulky, sap is heavy, and it's liquid, so it wants to escape unless you can keep it. And then, step 3, boiling. Now, if you don't have metal instruments, you don't have the ability to light a fire underneath your vessel. So the typical boiling technique was to take these hot rocks out of the fire and drop them into the log with the sap. And they would steam and bubble and dance around a little bit, and then when they lost heat, you would take them and put them back in the fire and heat the rocks back up. And you would continue to do that over and over and over. Now this guy here always makes me laugh every time I see this picture. I'm not sure if he's got a cold in his shoe or something, but he sure looks pretty happy to run around with a hot rock. So, we talked about legends and lore, but we'll get into a little bit of written records as well. There are all kinds of accounts by missionaries and captives of the Indians and fur traders as early as the 1550s, talking about maple sugaring as a springtime activity. You know, comments like a couple of tomahawk chalks across the bark and a birch bark basket start the process and so on. But there weren't very many detailed accounts of exactly how it was done, where it was done, or how many. So it was just more, oh, we were, you know, in this area in the spring and it was the sugaring time. The first real record was 1705, so you'll notice the difference there. There's a 150-year difference between people in their journals making notes of, you know, we've experienced this and we've seen this, and people starting to say, you know, hey, this is out there, and writing it down. Interestingly, this gentleman, Robert Beverly in Virginia, said, though this discovery has not been made by the English about 12 or 14 years, I guess he didn't know anything about those missionaries 100 years earlier. Yet it has been known among the Indians longer than any now living can remember. So basically he's saying, you know, this has been going on for 100 years or more among those communities. About 50 years later, around 1750, 1756, people started to actually document how it was done. And this gentleman, John Cathan, sent his son up the Connecticut River to spend the spring with a tribe of Indians to learn the process and to bring it back and to capture and document it. Right? This other gentleman, James Smith, was a prisoner for 7 years. But while he was a prisoner, he wrote a very extensive journal about the things that had taken place while he was there and the experiences and so forth. And I have to apologize because most of the history that I've been able to find is U.S. history. Probably because most of the maple syrup history in Canada is in French, and I don't read French very well. You'll notice here's a gentleman talking about 100 elm bark vessels of about 2 gallons each, and bark tanks up to 100 gallons each here. So in his record back from 1756, where that. And he talks a little bit about the process. Again, it's very much take a axe, take a tomahawk, put a gash in the tree, and then get that sap to come out on a stick or a piece of bark that's folded out so it gets away from the trunk, and then it'll drip into your vessel. When the early settlers came along, and it's interesting, some of the stuff I've been reading, they call them Euro-Americans, whatever that means. Things really didn't change much, right? The gathering and the cooking implements did. The settlers had access to coopers, so they could make wooden buckets. They also had access to metals, so they could make copper pots, they could make iron pots, and so forth, brass, and so forth. But in reality, the process is exactly the same. I'm going to say almost 200 years later. The early settlers, it was very much about producing sugar, not syrup. Sugar was a very stable product. You could make it in the spring, you could put it into your pantry, and you could have it for the whole year. It was easy to hold, easy to contain, easy to transport, and if needed, easy to trade. And when, in those times, the governments would give away plots of land, right? Hey, go back in the middle of nowhere, and we'll give you 100 acres and you can settle it, right? Oh, and the only rule is you got to have 10 acres of it cleared the first year, and then the second year you got to plant something, or something like that. In many of those grants and those grant documents, there was a recommendation that those settlers reserve a portion of their plot as a sugar bush, such that they would be able to produce sufficient sugars for their family's needs, basically going on forever, sustainably, right? So this gentleman up here has a couple of pots. You'll notice the yolk. Now, I should tell you a little secret. That picture is not from 1750. That picture is from about 1930. It was taken in Vermont by the Kerry Maple Sugar Company, who were doing a silent film at the time. It's about a 20-minute silent film on maple syruping over the ages. Now the actual film's been lost, but some of the footage still exists. So that gentleman, he's a Mr. Leland, and the picture was taken in the 1930s. But he was, at that time, kind of showing. The documentary did native sugaring, early settler sugaring, and then the Kerry Maple Sugar Companies were the best of the world sugaring. And you can see here the iron pots hanging over the arch, and the same here with these two ladies in the front. So that was about 1750. That's when maple syruping sort of became standard settler activity every spring. By 1790, so about 40 years later, a technique sort of became commonplace, which was to use multiple pots. And the idea was that you would boil your sap in the first of the pots, and as it became concentrated, you would bring it forward into a second pot, put more sap into the first pot, and you would essentially move the syrup forward as it concentrated. And other than a couple of gentlemen in the back that are syrup producers, we don't have that many, but that's the whole process now for all sugar makers today, is a continual flow process where we start with sap at the back and we move that sap through an evaporator into syrup at the front, right? We're not boiling a batch down to nothing, we boil and we keep adding and adding. So that started 1790. We like to think that, you know, we know what we're doing and we're learning stuff and we're creating new processes, but 200 and some years ago they were already there. 1800s, people started to worry about the health of those maple orchards. These families that had set aside a section of their 100 acres as a maple woods and had been every year slashing the trees, were starting to find out that some of those trees were not surviving. And so in the early 1800s, rather than slashing trees with a tomahawk and creating a big gash, people started using augers to drill a hole. Now, I'm sure there's somebody who's been working up at O'Hara Mills. I'm sure you're familiar with timber frame construction and augers. I mean, in timber frame construction, you drill a hole, you put a pin in it to hold it together. These settlers had these augers available to them, and somebody had the bright idea, why don't we drill a hole with the auger instead of into the maple tree instead of the slash, right? And of course, now that you've got a hole instead of a slash, you need a different way to get that sap away from the trunk so it can go into. So they started fashioning spiles from hardwood or taking the pith out of twigs and so on and so forth. And it's really not complicated. You take a piece of wood, any kind of wood, you taper the end, you push the pith out of the middle, and you've got a spot. And if you're anything like me and you boil sap for a while in the spring, you got lots of time to make a lot of them for next year. So here, slightly newer photographs, right? Here's the gentleman drilling with an auger. Here's a wooden spile sitting in a tin. Here's your three in a row. And a little call out for our friends at O'Hara Mill. Every spring they do a demonstration very similar to what we've just shown at sort of 1800 kind of time frame. They've got some of these large cauldrons sitting here. They've got the single cauldron, which is kind of the original start on a tripod, and then they've got a multi-cauldron set up as well. They also have some really neat old wooden spiles and thermometers and so forth from that kind of time frame. It's worth the day, absolutely. Now we start getting into specialized maple syruping equipment. So up until now, it's basically what you had around, what you had handy, or what you could make yourself, right? But once drilling holes became commonplace, then commercially available metal spiles started to become available. And I've got a couple of ads, if you like, from spiles of those days, and it's very interesting to read some of the text that goes with some of these old ads for metal spile. And the large pots started to become replaced by flat pans. Now the idea behind a big pot, you light a big fire underneath it, but where do the flames go? They go up and around the sides of the pot. And so you're losing heat out the sides, you're losing heat around the sides. With a flat pan, you build the flame underneath it, the flame comes up, it's got nowhere to go but underneath the pan and out to the other end, right? So flat pans started to become. And this is all in the interests of efficiency and speed and evaporating faster and faster. And if anybody, like me, has spent many, many springs evaporating maple sap outside, in the snow and in the rain, it didn't take them long for somebody to realize, why don't I put a roof over my head? And so then we start getting sugar houses. And sugar house design really has not changed in the last 200 and some years. It's got an evaporator, it's got a spot to put wood, it's got a chimney, and it's got a great big vent on the roof to let the steam out, otherwise you can't see where your friends are. So there's a little ad for the Eureka Sap spout. You can't read the text in here, but basically what it says is, I make the best one, nobody else is any better than mine. Use mine and you will make more syrup than anybody else absolutely can. And even though we're in tough times, you should buy them. Here we've got some wooden stuff. And you'll see here, right, now we're starting to get into larger operations where now it's not necessarily just a single family with a single farm, but now you're starting to get larger operations with a sugar house where we're starting to trade and or sell the products to others. So 1860s, still 150 years ago, right? The first patent for a flue pan. Now, flue pan is not a flat bottom, but now it's got ridges in it that go up and down and up and down. The first patent for a flue pan for maple syrup making was in 1861. 1861. And in 1862, the same gentleman patented a machine for making the flues. I'm not sure how he did it in that order, but... and you'll see here, right, the comments, great reduction in prices. This evaporator is by far the best implement ever offered the sugar maker. A great savings is made in time and fuel by its use. The sugar is nice and usually brings from 2 to 5 cents per pound more than other sugar. The other thing about a fast evaporator is if it spends less time in the evaporator, it has less opportunity to caramelize. You get a lighter colored syrup, you get a more delicate flavored syrup. And in that day and age, remember we're making sugar, not syrup. When you made it into sugar, whether it was granulated or solid, it didn't look taffy black. It looked golden or such, right? And the lighter the color, the more it was worth. And this Vermont Farm Machine Company in Bellows Fall, Vermont, was sort of the output of 4 or 5 local syrup producers who all had patents that then kind of got together and sold their patents to this one particular gentleman. The other thing of interest, right here, you can't see it very well, that's a patent application for a float that controls the amount of sap going into the pan. So it didn't take them very long to realize that if I'm evaporating this stuff pretty fast, I need a way to control the depth. And this is a float patent to allow the valve to open, let sap in when you're boiling, and then as the depth comes back up, it'll shut off and it'll keep you at a level that you've set it at. And again, the sugar makers will tell you the shallower it is, the faster it evaporates. You got less depth for those bubbles to take out, it will evaporate faster. Faster evaporation, better sugar, better prices, right? Too fast evaporation, smoke, no price. Been there. And then 1890s, again, right, we're over 100 years ago, in the 1890s. Now we're talking about a continuous flow, single pan, where the sap comes in one end, moves along the zigzag, through these little dividers and it comes out the front as syrup. And that's basically the grandfather of every evaporator that's out there today. This one here, he's got 2-in-1. And you'll actually see here a hard divider at the back, and those were his finishing pans. So he could run a different depth in the finishing pans at the back than he could in the front. By doing 2 sides, he didn't have as much sap in each side. So again, it would move through the process faster, turning into syrup faster. It just amazes me that 1890, we've got this amount of patenting and this amount of engineering and thought, scientific work going into developing a custom device specifically for evaporating sap. Everything I've talked about so far has been about maple sugar. We haven't talked about maple syrup at all. This is all about sugar. And maple sugar was the household sweetener in most of North America. It was made locally. You could trade it. You could store it. It was easy to carry. It was easy to pack. The earliest records that I've been able to find about people selling it commercially are about 1800. And between 1800 and 1810, the volume that was sold commercially went up by a factor of almost 10. So that's kind of the start of the commercial business for maple syrup, or in this case, maple sugar. Now, how do you make maple sugar? You take your sap, you boil it to the point where it would be syrup, and you keep boiling it, and you boil it, and you boil it, and you boil it, to the point where it's very, very thick and very treacly, and then you pour it into a hard wooden mold, and it will set. And it sets into basically a rock. So what are you going to do with this rock, right? You have sugar rasps. So you will find these in old kitchens. You will probably still find these in barns and so on and so forth, all kinds of different shapes. Every household had a sugar rasp, and you would have a block of sugar, maple sugar, in your pantry. If you needed sweetening, you just either shave off or scrape off whatever you felt that you needed. So, when did it change? Because we know now that you probably couldn't buy a block of maple sugar. You might be able to, but you'd have to go right to a sugar house to do it. You certainly couldn't find it in a store, right? So, in 1850, maple sugar and cane sugar, otherwise known as white sugar, were selling basically even in terms of price. U.S. maple sugar production peaked around 1860 at 40 million pounds. The same time frame, they made about 1.6 million gallons of syrup. So 77% of the product that was made that year was made as sugar. Not long after, 10 years later, the cost of cane sugar was declining as a result of automation. Now, automation is just a kind word for slavery. It all came out of the West Indies, and that's why cane sugar prices were going down drastically. The cost of maple sugar was not, because there were not slaves working in the sugar bushes. Basically, it was families and farms running in their own woods. By 1950, U.S. sugar production had decreased from that 40 million pounds down to about 350,000 pounds. So that's a tenfold decrease, at least more than a tenfold decrease. Interestingly, in 1950, U.S. syrup production was exactly the same at 1.6 million gallons. So the syrup production is just staying flat. But the sugar production is just dropping like a stone, and it's all because of cane sugar taking over the market. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would have maple sugar in their pantry. Well, Charlie might have, a little bit, it's possible. But you've got it for a reason, you've got a very small piece of it somewhere special. I bet you there isn't anybody in this room who doesn't have cane sugar in their pantry, right? And that's really the reality of what's going on. A couple more interesting things. I gotta watch my time here because With a captive audience on mic and maple syrup as a topic, I could talk 50s. Interestingly, the cost of a gallon of maple syrup tracked almost flat with the cost of a day's wages. 1890, a day's wages, we're talking labor wages here, we're not talking, scientific staff or anything like that. Day's wages, 1890, about $1. 1930, about $3. 1947, about $7. And that's about what maple syrup was going as a gallon. So you heard me being a little bit annoyed at $70 a gallon. If I take Ontario's current minimum wage, multiply that by an 8-hour day, I should have been paying $120 a gallon for that maple syrup. And Charlie, I don't know what you're selling your gallons for, but I'm in that $70 range. Plus or minus. Okay, interestingly here, U.S. maple syrup, this page is U.S., but I'm going to Canada next. U.S. maple syrup production is increasing. Back there in 1950, it was 1.6 million gallons of syrup. In 2016, which is the most recent information I've got for the U.S., is about 4.2 million gallons. So they're up by a factor of 3 in the last, I can't do that math fast enough, 66 years. Canadian maple syrup is going up as well. So, Stats Canada, down here is 2008. Up here is last year, 2019. You can see that we've got a steady climb in Canadian output of maple syrup. Our Canadian output was 13.2 million gallons in 2019. 2019 was a pretty decent year across Canada. That includes a little bit of sugar, but it's a very small amount of sugar. The Canadian maple syrup industry produces 71% of the world's maple syrup. It used to be 79%. The US is competing. They've gone up, we've gone flat. We're going up, but our percentage is going down because they're going up faster. 2019, Canada recorded the highest volumes ever since Stats Canada started collecting in 1924, but nobody believes there were volumes that were higher before 1924. Quebec, to the east, accounts for 91% of Canada's maple syrup production. And in 2016, the Federation in Quebec decided that they were going to add 5 million additional taps to their allocation to be online by 2018. They were online in 2018. 2018 was so it didn't really make a difference, but in 2019, those taps were in production and they had a good year. Maple exports today provide about $380 million, Canadian maple exports, that is. That's 2017. It's up and it continues to go up. Quebec exports 95% of Canadian maple syrup. And a sad little statistic here, we in Ontario produce 4.7% of Canada's syrup, but we consume 6%, which means we are importing from Quebec. Please buy local. And in 2017, 62% of our exports went to the United States. So in addition to the 4.2 million gallons of syrup they produced for themselves, and they export very, very little from the US, they imported 62% of what we shipped out of this country, which is fine. Germany's our number 2, 11%. Japan's number 3, and then there's about 20% left over that goes all over the world. And it's interesting because Canada is working, Export Canada especially, with developing maple syrup markets in other places around the world. There are very few other countries in the world that have the climate required. I just read an article about a gentleman in New Zealand who is starting maple syrup production in New Zealand using imported maple trees. They don't have native maple trees, but they have the same climate. He's got a very good niche industry in New Zealand. Okay, so I said I was going to talk about how things have changed or not changed from then to now. So Kind of talk a little bit about spiles because that's kind of where you start, right? We talked about slashing versus drilling. We all know drilling is going to be better for the tree, so that's what we're going to do. Spiles started as the hand-carved wood things, or sticks, or metal. And you can see as they're evolving, they really just look the same. These guys here are smaller in diameter. This typical rolled stainless steel has a 7/16 diameter hole. These have a 5/16 diameter hole. Doesn't sound like much difference, but the actual square inches of that hole, this is half as big. Which means your tree will heal twice as fast, right? And so most people are moving to 5/16 taps, or in the tubing, they're going down into quarter, and in some cases down to 3/16 inch diameter taps. And the whole idea there is you're creating a wound in the tree. The tree has to heal that wound. The tree will heal it faster if it's smaller, because the way a tree heals a hole, it doesn't fill the hole. It covers the surface of the hole, and then it grows over top of the surface of the hole, but it's got to close that hole first. So the smaller the diameter of the hole, the faster it is to close it, and then bark can grow over top of it.
Does it make a difference to how much sap comes in?
So, because I'm an engineer, I decided one year that I was going to do my own experiment, because I didn't believe the scientific research coming out of Proctor Research in Vermont that said it doesn't make any difference. And so I switched half my taps from these guys to these guys. And the short answer is it doesn't make any difference. The longer answer is these guys will thaw faster in the morning because they have metal and it transmits the heat in. So you'll get more drips out of those before noon. But by the end of the day, these ones are caught up. Every tree is a little bit different. Because I wanted to be as scientific as I could, I literally went metal, plastic, metal, plastic, metal, plastic, metal, plastic through my bush. Didn't make any difference. I was expecting I would go out the next day and see full, empty, full, empty, full, empty. Nah, didn't make any difference. Yes, the thin holes, they freeze a little bit up and you get that little plug of ice in them, but once it freezes up, the same amount of sap for the day. But the trees heal a lot faster. So I can go back the next spring and look at my trees. I could tell which ones have these and these ones. These ones I could find the holes. These ones I had to look really hard. Of course, over the years, there's been all kinds of different tapping solutions. You saw back in 1860-something, mine are the very best. Well, you can guarantee there wasn't one gentleman saying mine are the very best. There were multiple gentlemen saying mine are the very best. And so this is a wonderful display. I can't remember where I stole this picture from. But it's going back into sort of 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. And you'll notice in here, we've got tubing in the 1900s. Pails, kind of the same thing, right? We started up here with our birch bark. Settlers came along, they had coopers, so they created wooden pails. In some cases, they put a handle on the top, so you would hold that over your spile to get the pail down. Other cases, you just put a hole in the back. Galvanized steel was kind of next. Aluminum pails, and more recently, plastic. I'm not going to talk about my preferences around metal and plastic, but you can see what I'm using. But of course, do we even need pails? Right? So I got a question for you. Everybody's been out to a maple syrup place recently has seen pipelines. Anybody have any guess as to when pipelines became commonplace in maple syrup industry?
They're starting in the 1980s in Quebec.
1980s in Quebec?
I think so.
Second guess, anybody? This particular solution here, and it's called a gooseneck solution, was patented in 1916. In 1916, by a gentleman in Vermont. Again, Vermont was very big into maple syrup in the same time frame. He made it in his workshop. It was made from turnip plate steel. He would roll it to create these sections of tubing here. And then he would create these special little things with a drop such that they would come out of the tree and then drop into the main line. And they were selling them in 8s and 12s in terms of foot-long sections. And you could cut them to length. And the company that produced this, then the gentleman just wanted to produce in his workshop. So he only had 5 or 10 customers. And after about 5 years, somebody approached him and wanted to buy the rights to his design. It's the same Kerry Sugar, Maple Sugar Company. And that company produced that product up until 1931 when they failed spectacularly in bankruptcy. So interesting, not 1980, 1916. Plastic tubing became regularly used in sugar bushes in the 1950s and since then. With plastic comes vacuum. The idea behind vacuum is you can put just a little bit of suction. You help that sap to move from the tree down the lines to your collection. If you put a little bit more suction on it, you can actually encourage the sap to come out of the tree. So Jim said we don't really know how the sap moves in the tree. And we do, but not really, not in such a way that I could explain it to you without taking the rest of the week. So, but essentially, at night when the tree freezes, sap goes up the tree. And then during the day when it thaws, the weight of that sap up in the tree creates pressure in the trunk at the bottom of the tree. So when you create your hole, your spile, the pressure from above forces that sap to come out. If you didn't have a cold night, not that much sap went up the tree, so the next day not that much sap is above, so you don't get much pressure, so not much comes out, and it just kind of sits there. If you put vacuum on it, you can draw what's left in the tree down the tree and out. You can also draw sap up from below the tree and even through the roots in the end. And on that process of drawing it through the roots, you can get it picks up sugar in the way. So that's kind of why vacuum is. Probably the most recent development in the maple syrup business, and we're talking in the last less than 10 years now, is gravity vacuum. So people are going to a smaller diameter tube, 3/16 inch diameter tube. The small diameter inside the tube is small enough that surface tension keeps the sap together. And so by putting it on a slope, it fills up, and then the weight of the sap at the bottom pulls down the line and creates natural vacuum at the top of the line. So as long as you've got about 30 feet of height between your last tree and the spot where you want your tank, this 3/16 line will create the same amount of vacuum as those vacuum pumps that we just saw for free. Free is good. Free is always good. Which then comes to the next bit, boiling. And you start to wonder, why do I even boil? We got reverse osmosis machines now. Reverse osmosis technology is, I don't know how many years old it is now. It's been around for a while, but it's really just becoming mainstream. People are starting to put it in their houses to make sure that they've got good water coming out of their kitchen sink. Reverse osmosis was originally designed for sort of military submarine type stuff to take seawater and create drinking water from it, which then became water supply solutions for arid countries, otherwise known as Arab countries around the Gulf and so forth, that didn't have any water. But it's become moved, if you like, the technology's been moved to the maple syrup business. And so normal sap coming out of your tree runs at about 2% sugar, and we need to get it to 66% sugar to make it syrup. Reverse osmosis machines now, some of the what they call a high bricks, and bricks is a measure of sugar percentage. They're running up to 24, 26% sugar before they start boiling it.
What's the difference in kilocalories to run one of those and use wood?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Right. So basically the way a reverse osmosis machine works is you take your sap and you take a membrane, and the membrane is designed so that water can go through it and nothing else can. And you put a very high pressure pump behind the sap and you squeeze the water out of the syrup, or out of the sap. Now in a normal drinking water use, you squeeze the water through the membrane and you keep the water, because that's what you're looking for. Maple syrup, you work it backwards. You squeeze the water through it, get perfectly clean drinking water and throw it away. And then you keep what would, in a normal reverse osmosis, be the waste, right? But it works. And so the good thing is, I talked about 2%, and I got to get to 60%, which is about a 40-to-1 ratio. Well, if you're boiling high bricks, concentrated, that's come through a reverse osmosis, now you're boiling at 5-to-1, 8-to-1. So instead of sitting there, my wife called it my hobby or my sickness, or I don't know what you want to call it. Oftentimes she calls it watching water boil. Instead of sitting there watching water boil for 10, 12 hours straight, right? You turn your reverse osmosis machine on, you go in, you have a nice dinner, you come back out and you watch water boil for an hour or two, right? And yes, electricity is not free, but it's a lot easier to get electricity than it is to cut firewood. But the reality is you don't have to boil. You cannot take a reverse osmosis machine and take it all the way to syrup. High bricks, about 24, basically halfway there is about the best that they can do at this point in time. And that's because the characteristic maple flavor that we're looking for is caused by the caramelization process that occurs under heat. So if you don't use heat, you don't have any caramelization, which means you get sweet water, not syrup. Now somebody's going to say, well, does reverse osmosis syrup taste as good as maple syrup? I don't know. I don't have an RO machine. I think my syrup tastes better than any other syrup out there, so definitely not. But the scientists have been doing numerous taste studies with people who have much better palates than I do, and the jury basically says, you can't tell. The individual can't tell. The individual can tell that the two samples taste different, but they could not identify which ones are RO samples and which ones aren't. Right? And to me, that's about as good a test as there could be. So what's now new? Really now it's instrumentation and automation, right? So the big guys, not me, the big guys are running gas-fired, oil-fired rigs. They have temperature probes all over the place. They have auto draw-offs so that, it just, sap goes in one end, there's a float pan, keeps it at the right level, you're watching your temperatures, you're watching your stuff, and when it hits the valve opens, syrup pours out. And in fact, in this case, you see it's pouring out here, right, at the right temperature and into the pail. You can't really see it, but there's a hose down in this pail, and it's going over here to this, which is a filter press, and they're sucking it right out of that pail through the filter press, getting it perfectly clean and bottling it, right? As opposed to my process where bottling is, well, filtering and bottling is lots of fun. Let's just put it that way. And what else is new in the maple industry? Value-added products, right? Interestingly, granular sugar is considered a value-added product now, right? That's what everybody produced. Actually, they made hard sugar, but granular sugar was what you got after you used your grater on your hard sugar. But if you're in the maple syrup business, candy, granular sugar, maple butter, maple taffy are all value-added products. You make a lot more money per liter, per gallon, if you turn it into those value-added products than if you sell it just as syrup, right? They're not easy to make, and that's why they cost more. Just recently, bourbon-infused maple syrup. They take maple syrup and they put it in a old whiskey barrel, bourbon barrel, whatever. As far as I'm concerned, that is an absolute waste of good syrup. Why would you want to contaminate syrup with other flavors of any kind? This one here has cinnamon and vanilla. Who on earth came up with cinnamon and vanilla in maple syrup? I have no idea. But the next guy, now he's a genius. Because here we are, we've been talking about maple syrup and making maple syrup since, what did I say, 1550? 500 years? And this guy came up with the idea, he says, why the hell do you want to boil this stuff? Why don't you sell the sap? And that's the newest product that's out there right now. You can go into the grocery stores today and you can buy sap. I mean, there's maple syrup makers all over the world, rolling over in their graves. Right? You know what happens to our maple syrup makers? They don't die. They just evaporate. And some guy came up with this brilliant idea. Why don't we just put it in a can and sell it to them as is? Yeah. And by the way, I got 40 times as much of it as you guys do.
Yeah. Was his name Burnham?
I don't know what his name is, but but it's not quite that simple. Obviously, if you're going to sell sap, you need to pasteurize it, you need to have bottling processes and so on and so forth. But it is
drink it right from the tree.
Oh well, I can guarantee you that I have drunk more than my fair share of sap directly from the tree or directly from the fields. Yes.
Brewed with it.
Yeah, so there's maple wine, there's maple mead, there's a whole bunch of other products, but they're all on the side, right? They're marginal products. Okay, so am I doing okay for time? Yeah, I think so. Anybody bored? Anybody want to go home? Okay, so we're going to come now. I'm going to do a quick primer. Everything you need to know to make your own maple syrup at home. It's really simple. Drill a hole, collect the sap, boil it down, you got syrup.
Wow.
When do you tap? Sap runs when the temperatures are going above and below the freezing point between days and nights. I like to look for puddles. If there's frozen puddles in the morning and there's soggy puddles in the afternoon, you're probably at the right time frame. If there's leaves on the trees, you're too late. Right? -5 to +5 is perfect. -5 to -20, not so good. You don't want to tap your trees when they are frozen solid, because when you do that and then you hammer in your spile or your tap, then it will expand and it will crack the tree. You want to try to tap between 0 and -5 kind of time frame, or between +5 and -5. Around here, late February is kind of the start, early March is the start, and season is over when the buds start to open. So the buds are there on the trees today. They're just really tight and they're closed. Those buds have green matter in there. When the sun hits them, they're going to start to open up, and there's chlorophyll in that green matter. As soon as that chlorophyll starts to get sunlight, it's going to convert the sugars that are in that tree to starches. Sugar tastes sweet, starch doesn't. So as soon as those buds start to open and start to swell, then you get what's called buddy syrup. Buddy syrup smells like, some people say old socks, some people say dead frogs. It's not good. What do you need? Trees.
Maple trees.
Spiles, taps. You need a cordless drill. So that's got a really long extension cord. A little hammer. Buckets.
Okay.
Don't forget the buckets, so you'll be back to the hardware store like I was. Any kind of maple tree will do. Sugars, reds, silvers, blacks. Try to get healthy trees if you can. The bigger the crown, the better. Remember what I said about it goes up into the crown? And then when it's up there in the day and it warms up, it puts that pressure. The bigger the crown, the more they're up there, the more pressure, the more sap you're going to get out of them. If it's bigger than your bucket, put a tap in it. If it's smaller than your bucket, don't. If you can't get your arms around it, put a second one in. That's my rule. This one here, you might put a couple more in that one.
Is that a maple tree?
No, it's not.
Can't be.
It's not even a tree anymore. It's actually a chestnut tree.
Chestnut?
A chestnut tree.
American chestnut.
Yeah, before they all died.
Before they all died. Really?
These are my kids. This one here is 19, no, that's one's 22, so I have to remember which one it is. Pick a spot away from any damaged areas, you don't want to go in there, and 6 inches or more away from previous holes. So we talked a little bit about, we create a hole that it has to heal. When that tree heals, the way it heals is it seals off the wood cells above and below the hole, so the sap won't travel through them and leak out. So when you drill that hole, next year, there's a little section below the hole, above the hole, which is essentially dead. It's been sealed off. So if you take last year's hole and you go 2 inches straight above it, you'll get no sap, because it's already sealed off. Drill your hole about 2 inches deep, slight upward angle. The slight upward angle is not to let the sap come out. It's so that when you take the tap out later, it doesn't fill with rainwater, the rainwater drains out. And hang your bucket. And then wait, and wait, and wait.
Well, good picture.
On a good day, yeah, here, drinking straight from the spout. That's my niece. A good day, you might get 2 gallons of sap from a single tree. So make sure you have lots of storage. And this is kind of a spoiler, but sap is heavy. So the closer you can have your boiling spot to where your trees are, the better it's going to be. Otherwise, you got to haul them. Collect it every day. Treat it like milk. Best advice I can give you, it's just like milk. If it's freezing temperature, it'll last forever. If it's hot and sunny, it's going to smell. If you have to put it, some people, I don't want to boil every day, I'm only going to boil on Saturdays. Fine. Find a shady spot, pile of snow, put snow on top of it, keep it cold. It's just like milk. If it goes cloudy, you can't see the bottom of your bucket, don't boil it. Don't use it, throw it out, go get more. And if you get behind, boil the newest stuff, the good stuff. Because you might as well not boil the old stuff that's already almost there, and then have all the good stuff go bad too before you're trying to get caught up. So boil your newest stuff first. Simple equation, sap plus a whole pile of heat turns into a whole bunch more steam. And a tiny little bit of syrup at the end. How do you boil? Anything goes. On the stove, yes, I've done it. I've done all of these. Barbecue, that's my mom a long time ago. That's my little sister a long time ago. There's a flat pan. You can see the flames coming out the back of the arch here. This was my front yard one morning, and we finally got to the point where we've got an evaporator. So, on your stove, we're talking 5 trees or less. If you have more than 5 trees and you're trying to do it on your stove, you'll be buying new drywall and wallpaper too. 5 to 10 trees, a propane barbecue will work. A propane burner will work. If you get using a propane burner and you've got more than 10 trees, you better buy stocks in the propane company, because those 20-gallon tank or 20 pounders, they don't last long. But it's not really complicated, right? It's a little flat pan, bunch of concrete blocks, and a piece of stovepipe to get this sap up. And if you can get it boiling, you're making syrup. Boil efficiently. The shallower it is, the faster it's going to boil. If it's 1/8 of an inch, it's going to turn to smoke really fast because it boiled off, right? Probably 1 inch is a nice, safe number. If you get down under 1 inch, you're playing with fire, literally. The more surface area, the more evaporation. If you're going to have a rectangular shape, make it long and skinny instead of square. Because you put the same amount of heat under the front, it all flows underneath, it goes down the whole length, you get heat all the way along. If you have a square thing, your fire's just underneath it at one end, you only get heat for a moment, and then up the smokestack it goes. Try to add your sap slowly. Don't boil for a while and pour 5 gallons in, because you douse it, you put your boil out, you gotta wait for a while to get it back up to a boil, and you're not putting any steam off while you're waiting for it. Whereas if you can get a bucket and maybe put a little hose out of it with a tap on it, turn it up so that it just keeps flowing in at about the rate that you're boiling it off, you'll boil it off a lot faster. If you're using more than one pot, right, and this is a steam pan solution here, these are standard restaurant pans. You just go down to the, what is it, Trent Valley, you buy the restaurant pans. If you're doing that, now you're into a continuous flow type system. You put it in all of them. When the first one gets down to half, you put it in the second one, you put more in the first. When the second one gets down to half, you put it in the third one, put the first one into the second one, and just keep moving it forward. And eventually, you've got sap in the back pan, and you've got syrup in the front pan. Cool. And I can't stress this enough. When it's almost syrup, use a controllable heat source. If it's almost syrup and it's an 1/8 of an inch deep in your pan, it can turn from almost syrup to charcoal in about 2 minutes. Especially if you got a fire underneath it and you have no way of controlling the heat coming off that fire. Don't ask me how I know. I've spent many a time throwing snow underneath my pan, trying to get that heat out of there now. Because I'm getting down faster and faster and faster. And remember what I said, the shallower it is, the faster it boils? When you start at a 1/2 inch, it gets to a 1/4 inch pretty fast. It gets to an 1/8 inch really fast. It gets to a 1/16 of an inch even faster. And when it's a 16th, it's charcoal. And don't ever say to the kids, "Are you watching that?" And then walk away before you get a response back that says, "Yes, Dad, I am watching it and I will not leave it until you come back." I learned that one. I learned that one more than once. How much sap do you need? We talked 40 to 1. 10 trees, gallon of sap, you're going to get a liter of syrup, right? So that's a gallon of syrup of sap. When it's all said and done, that's what you end up with. There's a few bubbles in that one just because it and you're going to boil off 39 liters of steam, of water as steam. And I don't know if I can't remember, but I think the ratio between water and steam is 15 to 1. So that 39 liters multiplied by 15 is a heck of a lot of steam if you're in your kitchen. Rough estimate for every tap you put in. I use trees because I only have to put one tap in a tree, but for every tap you put in, you get about a liter of syrup. Rough estimate in a year. I've got records going back. I'm not that old, I can't tell you how far they go back. But we've gone from our worst year at 0.3 liters per tree, which is 2012. It was a 9-day season. Try to remember it. We put it where I want it to be every time. I haven't had a mold problem or a crystallization problem in more years. Now I've said that it's going to probably happen this year, but more years than I can remember. But if you're using a temperature gauge, try and get the best thermometer you can and make sure that the graduations are 1 degree or less. Otherwise you don't have a chance of getting it even close. And yes, this is a real chart. This is what they call the crystalline phase. This is where it will crystallize and things will come out. This is your liquid solution. This is your room temperature. And that, at 67, is your optimum syrup point. Right? But the important thing is, there's not much difference here between those two. So if you're using a thermometer, do that calibration for today. What is today's boiling point? Because if the boiling point today is off by 2 degrees from 112, it's actually 110. Well, you're way down here.
I think you should add another 100 to that number you used.
It's 212.
212, not 112?
Fahrenheit's 212.
No, so this is, sorry, this says temperature elevation. So that's 7 and 8.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, but you were talking boiling point of water.
It's 212.
Yeah, but you were saying
He said
112.
112.
Well, see, I'm not. So I'm a good Canadian. I talk metric and imperial at the same time. In fact, maple math is really easy. 10 gallons of sap makes 1 liter of syrup. There's your 40 to 1. It's built right into the calculations. Yes, I know. I'm a good Canadian. All right. So now what do? You got it boiled. You think it's syrup. It's close enough to syrup. It tastes like syrup, right? filter it a little bit. As you boil it, there's going to be minerals that come out of this. It makes it kind of almost like a flaky, sort of sandy stuff in the bottom of it. Pour it through a good clean cotton t-shirt, wash. Don't use a brand spanking new one. You'd be amazed at the chemicals on the brand spanking new ones. Wash it many times. Coffee filters work, several layers of cheesecloth. You're really just trying to take out any big particles. The niter, which is this mineral stuff, it won't kill you, but it has been known to make you visit the facilities a little more often than you might want to. So don't leave too much of it in. As a last resort, just put your syrup on there, wait till tomorrow morning, the niter will settle to the bottom, pour the good stuff off. But I'll tell you, it's really hard if you've just made a cup and there's a quarter cup in the bottom that's got stuff in it to leave that there. You're going to want to eat that, right? And if you don't, the kids will. And you don't want them running either. Bottling it, put it in jars, put it in mason jars. You want to get a good seal. After you put it in the jar, and you want to put it in the jar boiling hot, 180 degrees, 190 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And then take your jar, put your cap on it, and turn your jar upside down. By turning it upside down, the hot liquid will hit the inside of the cap, which it wouldn't otherwise, and it sterilizes the inside of the cap. There are mold spores everywhere. Syrup, sugary water, is a good environment for mold to live in. You want to kill those spores off, and you do that by turning it upside down and burning it. Leave it upside down for a little bit. The other thing that does is when you turn it right side up, it kind of mixes it. When you first put it in the jar, you'll get a little bit of steam, vapor off the syrup that sits in that airspace that's in your jar. When you turn it back up, it mixes that back in, so you don't end up with a little layer of water on the top of your syrup. That layer of water, again, is a mold. Perfect environment for mold. Or, if you don't want to be bothered with all that, put it in the fridge, put it in the freezer. You don't have to store it in your cold cellar. You put it in the fridge and freezer, and it'll stay there forever. It will not freeze in the, if it's syrup, it won't freeze in the freezer. If it does turn ice in your freezer and therefore cracks your jars, it wasn't syrup. And then enjoy it. And that is kind of all I've got. I got a couple more things that I just wanted to show you very quickly, and then I will let you guys ask whatever. Syrup grades. Everybody wants to know what's the difference between extra light and light. Well, extra light and light don't exist anymore. So in 2016, these old grades, Ontario grades, went away. We're now on the new international system. Golden, amber, dark, and very dark. Number one fallacy. Every single grade of syrup has exactly the same amount of sugar in it. The grading is based on the color alone. It has nothing to do with the amount of sugar. So if you're going to the grocery store because you want extra light syrup, because you like syrup but you don't need those extra pounds, sorry, extra light syrup has just as much sugar as the dark stuff. But the flavor will differ. The darker it is, the stronger the flavor will be. The golden has, they call it a delicate taste. The dark, I like to say, the golden is, it's maple with a hint of flavor. And the dark is miracle. Where do you get your stuff? I came up from Foxborough today. I noticed that the hardware store in Foxborough has a big sign out front. Maple supplies, get them here. Hardware stores, TSC, Trent Valley Distributors has all kinds of nice stainless steel pans and implements and so on and so forth. Your bottling supplies, you can get them anywhere. There are dedicated maple suppliers, there are honey suppliers, right? The stuff isn't rocket science. Just remember, you're making a food product. And I know you're just making it for your friends and family, but I don't know about you guys, I like my friends and family, so I'm going to make sure that it's edible for them as well. I'm not going to kill them off. And other resources, there's two maple syrup forums, mapletrader.com and this Sugarbush info. There are producers on there that have 2 taps. There are producers on there that have 200,000 taps. If you put a question up there, guaranteed somebody's already seen it before, but they will help you out. It's a wonderful sort of group of people. They're all there trying to, and everything from, I've got 10,000 gallons of sap, and I've only got a propane burner, what do I do now? Right? To, I've never tapped a tree in my life, is this a maple? Right? They're good. And I can't have any talk about maple syrup without talking about the Ontario Maple Syrup Producers Association. They are by far the most important agency, if you like, for maple syrup in Ontario. They promote good maple syrup practices. They have educational activities. They have all kinds of resources available. They also, Louise talked about the Maple Day in early April. They drive all of that. And if you're buying maple syrup, look for the Sweet Ontario logo. That Sweet Ontario logo is your guarantee that you've got an Ontario maple syrup producer's product. You're not buying Quebec syrup. Quebec syrup is okay, but it's not as good as mine, I can tell you that. And that's it.